Kia ora and welcome everybody to this week's Tech Bites. Great to have my mate Andy Berner here all the way from Colorado. He'll tell you a little bit more about that. So why don't we just get straight into it, Andy? Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your journey from New Zealand. Why did you leave? And where you're living and working now.
Well, it's really cool to see you, Craig. It feels like hasn't been maybe 6, 7, 8 years since we worked together. And just jumping on this call, it feels like no time has passed at all. So yes, I'm here in Colorado, Denver, Colorado, which is right in the middle of America. I'm about 1,000 miles from the sea at the closest way I might head, at about 5,000 feet, about a mile high in elevation. You and I know each other from my work at Chorus. So you can hear from my accent, I'm English originally, but I've spent half my life, 20 years in New Zealand, mostly in Auckland and Wellington. So I'm a dual citizen, New Zealand and UK. And I worked with you, when I worked with you, I worked in human resources and HR and helping us scale Chorus, Telecom Spark before that. Sorry, it was called Telecom back then. Now it's Spark in New Zealand. And I had the opportunity to work with Xero back in, must be 2014. So I joined Xero when it was a lot smaller than it is today. We were about maybe 350,000 customers globally. It was already a listed company. I think the market cap was somewhere around the $1 billion mark. Can't quite remember. We had, I remember, 750 staff around the world. And today, I think we're over 3,500, 20 billion market cap, over 2.8 million subscribers or customers on our platform. So it's seen immense growth, and I've been able to have the opportunity to come to the US and work on the US and Canada, or Americas as we call it, kind of growth strategy. So I didn't leave New Zealand. I came to America. I don't think anyone leaves New Zealand.
Yeah.
And also yeah, that's right. And also I have a second role as the Honorary Counsel for New Zealand to Colorado, a role which I was appointed into just a couple of weeks back. So looking forward to doing some work there in that space and helping New Zealand companies connect here in the US.
How does that sort of thing happen? You get appointed to being
how does it happen
like that?
So over the last few years, since Xero set up shop in Denver, Colorado as the headquarters for the Americas, I was obviously heavily involved in that, and it created a bit of a, I suppose, a beacon somewhat for New Zealand small tech companies and talent to Denver. And Denver really is an up and coming tech destination, and it has a lot of similarities with New Zealand. So we already have companies here. We have the mountains, we have adventure. You see a lot of Kiwis coming out working in the ski fields, those types of things. So there was already kind of some connectivity in the aerospace and technology industries. And over time, just more and more companies coming here, they needed somebody on the ground. And I've opportunity to host members of parliament and other people who've come out here to understand kind of how things are working here. And over time, I got asked if I'd like to apply for this gig. I went for a selection process a couple of years ago now, and it took quite a while to get through all the appropriate hoops to set up a new consulate. And you just got appointed into that role, which is exciting. I haven't actually done anything yet, so I can't tell you what it is that I'll be doing in too much detail.
Well, I know you pretty well, so I'm sure you'll be a great ambassador for us in that space. Hey, let's just talk a little bit about pre-COVID. So we'll get to COVID soon. But what was it like working for a New Zealand company overseas when you first moved over there?
So I think it was quite a culture shock. So I've worked in the US in and out. I've traveled to the US, in vacation here, holiday. You watch US TV all day, right? You think you know it, and you get here, and it's just not. It's just so different. And remember, the US isn't just one place. The US is states, and the kind of cultural differences just between the different cities that you might work in and visit. So it was a big culture shock. It has been pre-COVID, obviously. It was a culture shock. It took a little while to kind of understand how to do business here. It's at a scale that we don't experience in New Zealand, and when I say scale, that could be customer numbers or people or the things that people have had the opportunity to experience. There's always somebody who knows or has done something very different to you. And really tapping into networks and meeting people, it's kind of expanded my horizons, expanded my viewpoints, I think was probably the best way. I really felt like I was learning how to do my job all over again. I started here specifically with my HR hat on, and that kind of broadened over time. So I got to learn how to do different roles as well as work in a different context. I must say though, it's a really fun place to do business. There's so much going on here all the time.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Oh, and then, I suppose that's the other benefit of working in a large organization and in a larger environment. You can develop and move and change, what you're doing. You can move out of HR, you move into other areas. It's something I've always said to people who work in corporates: always look for opportunities that are around you. It's
been really cool to be part of a New Zealand organization expanding into the US, because we've really been able to bring a little bit of New Zealand and Australia into a kind of work culture into what we do, the way that we think about our benefits for our staff, the way we think about kind of health and well-being, the way we think about kind of empowering people in their roles. You've really, and a lot of companies here already do that, but we really brought that kind of flavor through, and it's been something which I think team members here would notice it different to most corporate America kind of jobs. And it's something we're quite proud of, the culture that we've exported and created in the organization here.
Yeah, actually, you may not be able to answer this question, but when you talk about Xero in the Americas, what sort of percentage are local people working for Xero?
Yeah, so most of the employees in the US and Canada, and I don't think we break the staff numbers up, but most of the employees are from here, and there is a handful of us who have been imported from other parts of the globe, who have experienced Xero in different growth phases. So we're able to bring that kind of knowledge and mesh it with the local knowledge. It's interesting, you see between other places pre-COVID, you see a lot of traveling, younger employees who are doing their gap years and stuff, but already had maybe a gig of us in New Zealand really wanted to work in the UK and the other way around. And that was a really cool thing. We were able to enable that so people could have their overseas experience and also kind of keep their career forming, which has been really cool.
Yeah. We did a session a couple of months ago with a couple of young Kiwis, one in Canada and one in the UK, just talking about what's it like in this current environment. And they were actually quite positive about people still being able to get overseas. Well, let's just talk about the pandemic, shall we? Because, within your where you are, I mean, how has it generally impacted your life and the way you work and your organization?
It is such a big question. It is such a big question. So I've had the ability to see the pandemic from multiple viewpoints. So as you know, I was very lucky in the fact I was able to come back to New Zealand November last year through to February, and which were some of the darkest days here in the US with the highest case numbers pre-vaccination. So I've got to experience the pandemic living in it here, and also the viewpoint that one forms in New Zealand, where it's something that's happening somewhere else with circuit breakers in place. So I'll maybe break into components from a work perspective. It's been really interesting. I haven't been into an office apart from when I was in New Zealand for over 500 days. I've been in my basement, and I'm very lucky. I have an office in my basement I can work from. Many people in shared housing or accommodation flatting situations haven't had that luxury, right? So it's been really interesting. The way that we do work has changed fundamentally. I think we'll talk a bit more about that kind of down track, but that's been, again, relearning how to do business in a completely virtual environment. And I'd say that I had an advantage because we do international business. A lot of it is virtual, but it's still a big lift to be able to work like this versus in person, especially for some of us who are more extroverted. As you remember from working together, I really like being around people, so it was a bit of a struggle. Then personally, we'll probably pop back to that work component when we talk a little bit later. But personally, it's been a journey. So at first it was kind of novel. We went into a lockdown here, just like you've experienced in New Zealand, but it lasted for a long. I actually know how long it lasted. It seemed to just stretch on forever, and the science was changing. So we didn't know if you could. Are the Amazon packages safe? Do you need to bleach them before you bring it into your door? Like, how do you make sure that you can get your groceries to home without exposing yourself to this rampant virus? To then kind of understanding it was an airborne virus, and if you wear a mask, you could wash your hands. You could pretty much still go to the supermarket, and so but not having any social interaction. Everyone kind of keeping themselves. We didn't have the bubble concept. That was a New Zealand thing. Right. So there wasn't like you have a bubble, like it's like you're not supposed to see people. But also depending on where you are in the States or what your beliefs may be, you may or may not have been living that experience, which is really interesting. The schools were shut down for most of the school year. So my 7-year-old daughter, she's 8 now, doing all her second grade classes, so second year at school, all of them remote virtually for 6-7 hours a day, 6-7 hours a day, all day, while I'm sitting 10 feet away, doing work all day virtually. So it was a very strange thing to see how the schools adjusted and how parents were having to help tutor children while working remotely, or if they're in service jobs, they were still out there being exposed to the pandemic. So quite an interesting view into how people's worlds were different. I think someone said it best. We might all be in the same ocean, but we're not in the same boat, honestly.
Yeah.
Like people are experiencing it very differently.
Yeah. Hey, you mentioned in there, you are an extrovert, and yep, absolutely. I know you well, worked with you. As a leader, I mean, what did you change as a leader as a result of that experience?
Yeah. So I think there's some of those things that we've changed in how we work will stick with us now. So I feel that we as an organization, I'll use the Americas business because that's kind of how I'm experiencing it. There's far more interconnectivity than there ever was in the office, because we have been very deliberate in putting in place motions to ensure that we are connected. So one, really basic things like our leadership team here would meet every morning at 9 o'clock virtually, and we're spread across multiple time zones. It was 9 o'clock in my time zone, 8 a.m. in San Francisco, kind of 11 out on the East Coast. We'd have coffee and we'd talk about what was happening that day. Now, we were all dispersed. We never met daily to talk about what was happening. Yeah. We relied on the interconnectivity in our weekly formal meetings. So a lot more informal and deliberate time connections, which kept us really connected. More use of tools. So, we always had Slack and Asana boards for project management and all of these things, but we heavily rely on the asynchronous ways of working now. So we were already doing it with other time zones. Now we're doing it within our time zone. And the particular mesh of that personal life and work life, when particularly for parents or whatever it might be, because those services of having a child would be available, meant that what would normally be you're going to go to something, we now record a lot of those meetings. We have notes sent out. We use Slack to kind of ask questions in. We submit forms in advance. It's much more deliberate ways of working, which I think has increased our efficiency and actually reduced stress. Now, I don't, if I have to do something, I know it's okay for me to skip a meeting because I know there's ways that I'm going to be up to speed. I've got ways of making sure my input's put in. So when we go back to the office, which hopefully won't be too long, but the Delta variant's causing a few issues on that for us, and we can talk to that. Yeah. We're going to keep those ways of working. We're going to, and look, those ways are all good. I like talking to people, so I'm one of the last people you're going to get to work asynchronously, and I do it fine. And we should probably talk. I think we're seeing that in outside of the work realm and people's personal lives. Here in the US, where vulnerable people, a lot of my neighbors are in their kind of 60s and 70s, and they, until the vaccines came out, they weren't able to kind of leave their homes, so they were playing poker online with on Zoom, and they're on Snapchat, and there's been a digital transformation education forced by loneliness, which I've never seen before, which I don't imagine, but we've had to the same extent in New Zealand. We're probably seeing it in Australia with their lockdown. So it's really interesting seeing the kind of self-serve education and digital trends changing here. So different consumers now.
It's a fascinating conversation because, you know, we look back, I mean, this time last year, actually, we would have been out of lockdown this time last year. We might have been in a level 3 or 2. I can't remember, you know, we bounced around a little bit last year. But it's not until you talk to people who live in other environments. I mean, I've got a son in Northern Ireland. I mean, he hasn't been in the office about the same amount of time. In fact, he's just started a brand new job, picked up his laptop from somewhere and did all his induction yesterday online. So, you know, he doesn't know when he's going back to the office. So it's a really different way. I really like that comment you made about the, you know, the meeting that you have with your leadership team. And I think you said you were going to continue that on.
Yeah, we will. We've actually skinnied it down to a couple of days a week now, but we're going to continue that informal cadence on top of our normal ones, because it helps the connectivity that you used to get just by bumping into each other, but always with a dispersed leadership team. You didn't capture everybody's views and opinions.
Do you remember the days when we used to do audio meetings? There'd be like, this is when we were at Chorus, you know, there'd be 8 people in Wellington and 2 of us in Auckland, and the 2 of us in Auckland would get bored out of our brains, couldn't keep up with the conversation. The tools these days, I mean, the conversations I'm having, I heard a presentation last week, you basically got all or nothing, isn't it? You've got to be all on video or all in the room, because it just is complicated trying to do it any other way.
It's really interesting because, you know, we've always talked about in the HR world, and, you know, which jobs can be done from home. I remember one of my early kind of things I worked on in HR in New Zealand was a company's kind of remote call center stuff. How are we going to make that happen, right? And then all of a sudden over here, we just had to make it happen. And it wasn't so much a problem for us, but you see companies that would never do remote working before, now they've gone 18 months without having people in the offices. Like if it's worked that long, it now works.
Yeah.
I think one of the McKinsey did a good paper back in October, so still only halfway to where we've got today, around the trends that were most likely to stick. And I think it was about over half of companies thought the increase in remote working and remote collaboration is going to be, you know, one of the biggest things that stick. And the first biggest thing was changing customer expectations. And you talk about personal life. I sit at home working now, and if I need my tires on the car changed, I just go online and someone turns up and does it. Like, everything comes to you now. Yeah. And so it's really like the idea of going sitting in the garage for an hour and a half or for an oil change or something, you just wouldn't do it. It's gone way outside technology, right? Like, technology enabled services everywhere. It is really interesting. I think it's just a natural evolution of what was happening, got sped up by depending on who you read. The McKinsey article says 7 years. I saw there was a quote in your accelerating a connected kind of world paper. There was a quote about 2 years and 2 months. But, you know, stuff that was going to happen happened on fast forward, and businesses that weren't going to make it, they didn't make it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because, I mean, obviously here we're talking, and the government's coming up with a strategy shortly about, well, we presume they are, around digital adoption and the momentum. And there's a lot of work to keep that momentum sort of going that we came out of lockdown. And obviously we didn't have as big a lockdown as you, but you're obviously, you're already talking about it, but you're seeing that same boost happening in the US, where that adoption and momentum is just not ending, or is it?
No, I don't. So I don't have any data points, but looking at that kind of McKinsey article that I read a couple of months ago, which was one of the best ones, talked about a whole change in customer profile. Like, as I said, people that never use digital tools learn how to use them, and they're not going to suddenly drop them. No. So now you're engaging with a whole different kind of customer expectation, and businesses that can't take, you know, who can't do e-commerce or can't deliver a service to the home, or weren't able to, you know, use digital payments, those businesses just, their business model got disrupted so badly, it fell away. And whether this pandemic, however it ends in some way, shape, or form, those expectations, I don't think are going to go backwards. I mean, sometimes it's novel to go somewhere to get something. You know, people like to go to a retail store to try something on, but once you know your sizing in that store, if you can order everything for free online with no return issues, then you're going to do it.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, my mum's 81. She doesn't go to Briscoe's anymore. She orders it online because it's free delivery, you know?
Yeah, it just sped up so quickly.
Although she does still go to the bank because she wants to talk to the bank people. Yes, she just wants a conversation.
You can understand that. Yes, and we're also seeing a massive economy boom here. So, you know, lots of organizations finding it really hard to recruit and retain talent. I'm not just talking about technology and highly paid organizations. I mean, you know, restaurants, gas stations, like there's these, like, you know, signs up everywhere. People can't hire people fast enough. Which is really interesting as well.
That's a really interesting one, because obviously there's a lot of conversation in New Zealand about skills, and particularly around, you know, in the sector we're in about, you know, because immigration is closed, bringing in workers, and just the difficulty of finding staff. It's interesting that it's not just us, that you're finding that in the States as well. So it does change. Yeah. It has changed everything, hasn't it?
It has. I was actually thinking about this, about kind of New Zealand's position on with skills, because it's hard to find, you know, with the borders closed to protect us, it's going to be really hard, you know, for that kind of positive immigration that comes in, highly skilled workers. But then to a point, all those jobs can be done asynchronously and remotely now, if you think about those roles. However, that cuts both ways. New Zealand workers could be hired by much better funded, highly paying organizations from overseas, and go the other way. So I don't know how that kind of plays out over the long term, because New Zealand workers are, you know, are very skilled and, you know, great, especially technology, great technology workers. So I don't know if anyone has kind of started recruiting en masse into, you know, organizations like that. But with the skill shortages we're seeing around the world, I'm surprised that hasn't started happening too much.
That's a really good point, actually, Andy. Hey, just lifting the vision a little bit, because you're in your role, you are a digital leader and you're a Kiwi. So, you know, we have the aim of New Zealand being in the top 10 by 2030. We're about 19th at the moment. Looking back from where you are to us, you know, what are the big ideas you think we should focus on?
So thank you for giving me a heads up on this question, because you did, and I needed a minute to think about it, because there's so much in that bucket that you could do. And not too long ago, I read your research article around the digital priorities for New Zealand, which I thought was really cool. Some really great insights in there. One thing that really stands out to me, and it might be through my lens as kind of a people leader over time, is education and the digital divide, and is what's going to make a big difference. So I don't think we're ever going to get to the top 10 unless we are producing and enabling highly talented individuals to learn these things, these trades almost, right? Otherwise, we just won't have the capacity to become a digital-led nation. So I think it starts in education. It's also the people whose jobs are going to be disrupted over time by the digitalization of the workforce. We need to make sure those people have access to the training and education to retool themselves for the world this today. Otherwise, we'll leave behind a lot of people socioeconomically, and that won't be good for any of us. Is that how's that come out in kind of conversations that you've been having?
It's such an interesting point, Andy, because, you know, we are, as a membership association, we're strongly corporate, and corporate membership is incredibly strong. So, you know, I'm often talking to the digital leaders, and even through that piece of research, I was quite pleasantly surprised how the divide or the equity issue came up from a lot of leaders. And I know, working with the Digital Boost Alliance, it's the same thing. You know, how do we lift everybody and leave nobody behind? I think it's an incredibly important conversation we need to have.
And when I was thinking about, Oh, sorry, no, Craig, you go.
No, I was just going to say, it's not just a conversation. You've got to do something about it.
Yeah, I think it's a hard one, right? It's like every economic shift over, be it the Industrial Revolution, you know, when someone came along with a steam train tractor, and the people are there pushing their plow, right? We've got to retrain people in some way so we don't leave them behind. Also, cybersecurity, I think, is going to be really interesting. So New Zealand has a reputation, with one of the least corrupt countries in the world. There's a reputation around New Zealand which is positive, right? And also cybersecurity is becoming a big issue. So if you think about outsourcing or taking stuff overseas, people worry about security and the types of people that might work for them. I think New Zealand may have an opportunity for its brand to be a leader in that space. I don't know what that looks like. It was just kind of something that came to mind as I was musing it. And I think security is becoming cybersecurity. One, with everybody working remotely over here at the moment, security of your infrastructure and your information is extremely important and top of mind. And add to that the recent cyber attacks that we've been seeing on critical infrastructure, oil pipelines, hospitals. I think it's going to be really important.
Yeah, I think in New Zealand, our physical distance has worked really well for us in COVID.
Yes.
But it doesn't work for you in cyber at all, because you're milliseconds away or microseconds away from anywhere when it comes to that. I'll just ask you one more question, which I didn't actually send through to you, but this is really around some of our future leaders who'll be listening. You talked about it earlier that, young Kiwis typically look to do their OE, etc. It's a little bit on the back burner at the moment. But you've got experience around the world. You still encourage people to try and get out and have a look around the world?
So I think the answer to that is yes. I do. I think the problem right now is not leaving New Zealand, it's getting back.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
And it can be very, especially for a younger person heading off on their first big adventure, to know that they don't know when the door's going to be open for to come back, and you kind of cast alone off into the world. It's probably going to be quite a scary thing to go after, but you can get on a plane, you can leave New Zealand, you can walk into a pharmacy in the US and get a vaccine, without an appointment. Yeah. So you can protect yourself. But obviously there are, variants of this thing running around where people are still getting sick. So New Zealand is safe and where I think everybody would choose to be right now, from a kind of health and safety and a longevity point of view. But the world is still turning, and jobs, there's a boom around the world in different places, and there's still jobs to be done and things to be learned. So I think if you're ready if you've always wanted to do it, there's nothing stopping you going. Just the way back will be tricky. And you do hear of people stuck around the world, both in New Zealand and Australia, who would love to be home and aren't able to. So I think one has to go into it with their eyes wide open.
Cool. Yeah. Look, Andy, it's been great talking to you. Great to see you again. Is there anything else you want to say before we finish up?
Well, firstly, thanks so much for inviting me to chat to you. It's lovely to see you. And I think it's just, it's been great. I was so lucky to be able to spend some of COVID in New Zealand, kind of reconnecting with people in New Zealand and feeling, and it was like a place that provided kind of safety and shelter for my family. So it was just so lovely to be back. And if anybody does want to touch base about what it is like being overseas, just feel to, through you, they can reach out and give me a call. Yeah. Always happy to take 5 minutes to chat.
Thanks, mate. People, you can find Andy on LinkedIn, or you can contact me and I can help you out with that. Well, look, so thanks so much, Andy, for your time. It's been awesome talking to you. I mean, it comes back to you. We were talking about this, about working elsewhere, but, 2 years ago, we wouldn't have thought of doing like a session like this and having a chat with someone overseas.
And we're never going to go back. So this is the new normal. Great chatting to you, Greg. You stay safe and well over there.
You too. All right. Mā te wā.
See you later. Bye.